Hello and welcome. I'm Patrick Curtis, your host and chief monkey, and this is the Wall Street Oasis podcast. Join me as I talk to some of the community's most successful and inspirational members to gain valuable insight into different career paths and life in general. Let's get to it. In this episode, Jonathan Kroll, partner of RareBreed VC Fund, shares his winding path coming out of UC Santa Barbara. From teaching himself how to code to launching 2 startups out of school to attending Cornell's Johnson School of Management for his MBA many years later, Jonathan explains how he successfully pivoted to venture capital by landing an internship with Andreessen Horowitz in their market development group. Enjoy. Jonathan, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks, Patrick. Great to be here.
So it'd be awesome if you could just give the listeners a short summary of your bio.
So I'm Jonathan Kroll. I'm a partner at RareBreed Ventures. We're a $10 million pre-seed and seed fund. We're on our first fund, and I'm currently raising fund 2, which should hopefully be significantly larger. Before that, I was at a fund called Sparrow Ventures, which is a single LP fund based in Silicon Valley, backed by Pyramidar. And then prior to that, I was at Andreessen Horowitz on an operating team, and then kind of moved a bit horizontally. So that's like the second half of my career. The first half was all entrepreneurial. I started a company right out of college, did that for 6 years, and then started another company sort of accidentally, and then went to business school, figured, okay, I spent 8 years being a founder, going really deep. I kind of wanted to explore the opposite of that, which is, going really, really broad. And so in the tech world, you can either basically be a journalist, you could work in an accelerator, or you could be a VC, or I guess you could throw like a startup studio in there as well. But like, there's not many arenas where you get to go really, really broad and broadly cover the early stage world of startups and venture capital. So that's kind of what got me into VC.
For sure. And then you're from the Santa Barbara area?
Yes, I grew up in Santa Barbara and currently located in San Francisco, but with a couple of years in New York.
Awesome. So let's go all the way back to just kind of UC. You were at UC, right? So did you know when you were there, it looks like you were really into languages, but you weren't into like startups, or maybe you were starting businesses then. I'd love to just hear, did the entrepreneurial bug hit you early, and what happened kind of for you to kind of just found a business right out of school instead of your traditional route?
So I'm not one of those people who like was selling candy bars or like flipping bikes and stuff like that as a kid and making a ton of money. That wasn't me, but I did my first entrepreneurial venture, I guess, I was a huge nerd, right? So I also was really into aviation. So I started a virtual airline, which used to be, I think it's still a thing, but it's all based around Microsoft Flight Simulator, like 95, 98, 2000. And, pilots, there'd be actual people who join as pilots. And I started a virtual airline, had my own fleet, had all these people who, quote unquote, worked for me. And then I sort of like
a simulator, it was like a game, like a Sim City kind of thing.
So imagine if exactly like, Microsoft Flight Simulator, at the time was really single player.
Got it.
And so people wanted to like join, simulated airlines and feel like what it would be like huge nerds, right?
Yeah.
So we were the people who love commercial aviation. We're not even talking fighter planes. We're talking like 757s, stuff like that.
Love it.
So people come together. So I founded this virtual airline and then ran it for a couple of years. I was like 12 when I started it, but it got pretty big, and I sold it. I burnt out. I burnt out. You have to make all these routes. You have to manage all your fleet. You have to like keep logging the hours for all these.
Was it actually like bringing in money?
Oh no, none of it's about money. I mean,
it was all just about like community and just a love for planes and that type of thing.
Honestly, it was a way to enhance the game because it made it multiplayer, and for people who are nerds about commercial aviation, it was a way to like nerd out hardcore and fly real routes and like kind of like pretend.
So you were like flying actual routes? Is it like real time? You'd actually fly and you'd have to spend like 4 hours on the computer?
I can't believe I'm admitting this publicly, but yes. So like if you're flying like a transcon from like SF to New York, you're sitting there for 4.5, 5 hours, and you're flying the actual like standard terminal arrivals and stuff that, the procedures, or at least close there too, like the procedures that like real pilots follow, because we're all like home taught when we're 12.
So your next career will be as actual pilot, maybe?
If I were to be, I would pull like a Richard Branson or John Travolta, right? Probably more like a John Travolta, where he just like wanted to be a pilot, became an actor, made a ton of money, and then now has like his own, I think he has like an old 707 Qantas, old vintagey airliner, and flies that around. I think that's the best way to be a pilot, right? Is to just be independently wealthy and do it for the joy of it, and then not get to lose that bug as a pilot flying people day in, day out. But that's so enough on a career I didn't follow.
So like when you were at UC Santa Barbara, were you just tell me like the path, like were you doing internships, like the typical things like sophomore year, summer?
I have a very atypical background than what you might expect. So, so to say, like when I was like 12, 13, loved technology. It was all about it. Was building websites like really early on that. I remember AOL, I was building websites like when I was like 10 or so, with dial-up internet. Figured that out on my own and just really like loved that. And then somewhere along the line between there and college, I sort of like lost that love. And so I went to college with like a different idea. I wanted to be a diplomat. So I was going to join like the US Foreign Service, and I was really good at language and really good at learning it. And I just had that brain for some reason. So I decided, well, kind of like decide to some degree where I end up in the world. So I have a degree in French, Spanish, and Portuguese. I also took a lot of Italian and even took some Catalan in there. And so that was my goal, right? I was going to go join, basically the government after graduating. And at the time, that would have been 2007. So what happened was like in 2006, 2007, that was a crazy time in the world and a crazy time for technology. That was like the peak of Web 2, or like just the initial like uptick of Web 2. Yeah. Kind of like what we're going through now with Web 3 and crypto. But iPhone came out the summer I graduated college. iPhone 1, Facebook was like 2 years old as a startup. YouTube was an independent startup. All this stuff was happening really, really fast. And I was like a senior in college watching this thinking like, there's no way I can go join the government. I'm too excited about this. So I actually like finished up my classes and would go home. And then like, I taught myself how to code because I was really good at languages. There's definitely like an analogous relationship from like computer languages to natural languages. So for whatever makes my brain a sponge for language, made it a sponge for, computer languages. Exactly. Yeah. So I got it really quickly and loved that. And I was obsessed, right? Because to me, it was like, wow, in theory, you can like create basically infinite value from nothing, no inputs, no raw materials. Yeah. I have to get involved in this. So I graduated and I started a company right away, and I didn't know anything. And I was a guy with a degree in languages. So it was a very atypical background, no internships, none of that. Cause I had this path for like 90% of college that I was going to follow. Oh,
so you knew like you were going to do the coding and stuff when you're like a sophomore or junior?
No, I was going to be a diplomat. I was going to
you were going to be the diplomat. And then suddenly it was like a 90 degree or 180 degree turn. You're like, no, actually just kidding. I'm going to go teach myself coding and move to Silicon Valley.
Exactly. So that all basically happened in a year from like piquing my interest to starting a company.
And so did you think about ever joining a startup, or you just realized they're never going to hire me because, no one wants a triple language major?
That, and at the time it wasn't the same environment as it is today. This is 15 years ago. So it wasn't as easy to know, what startups to join. There definitely weren't as many startups at all.
So what was the idea and what was the first startup? Tell us about it.
Yeah. So I come from a family of lawyers. And the only thing I besides being a diplomat, I ever knew, actually, I knew I never wanted to be a lawyer. So that's the only other like career sort of inclination I had early on. Yeah. Because all of my family, my dad, my grandparents, my grandmother, who was born in 1915, was a lawyer in the 40s when barely any women were lawyers. And so everybody. And I knew what it was like to, be in that environment, because the law kind of is all encompassing. Like my dad was always working. Our garage was full of those banker boxes, and always on calls or knee deep in a stack of papers. And so, over time growing up in that, I knew a lot about how the law and law firms worked. I knew a lot about the problems in that very traditional industry. Like basically had realized like how untouched it was by technology and how much, there was to potentially gain, for everybody in that industry. If technology was the backbone of it versus just, pen and paper. So I figured kind of very naively, actually, that like, okay, well, I am going to try to start a legal tech startup. And the idea was that we wanted to democratize access to the top 1% of lawyers and law firms starting in California. And that's because lawyers and law firms, the best lawyers, don't advertise. They see it as beneath them. It's firm. That's the name of most of those top funds. None of them have a brand name. And so they're not running Google ads or anything like that. They all subsist on referrals from other attorneys, basically.
Yeah.
And, for the big dollar amount type of cases, like class action or personal injury or like insurance bad faith type of things, the client never pays an hourly fee. It's all contingency based because the dollar amounts are so huge. The lawyers actually want to take their 30-40% cut.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter if you're in the network. It doesn't matter if you speak English or an illegal immigrant, but you'll never find your way to the top lawyers and law firms because you're not in like the second degree network from those guys, but there's no reason for it. And actually it's like mutually beneficial for them to be, those two sides of the market to be connected. So we built this like algorithmically driven marketplace to kind of like take the man on the street, get all of the salient details about their legal matter, and then determine like who that's appropriate for, and as far as like what types of attorneys, and then try to like go deeper and then match them on like basically like a dating site, like other variables to increase the likelihood of a successful like engagement between a lawyer and a client, which is a very problematic relationship in a lot of those lawyer-client relationships for a variety of reasons. And our revenue model was tied to that success. So we had a vested interest in that.
And so you ran it for a while.
Did it for 6 years. I knew nothing. I started with basically just a lot of very overly eager optimism, and I learned a ton. I learned a ton. So 6 years in, I'd raised about $1 million, had a good team going, but basically ultimately realized I'd built a company that could not scale and really was starved for cash because we subsisted on our cut of the legal fee that the lawyers made, which was also a very difficult thing to even be able to take in revenue
to even collect.
Well, yeah, typically that's illegal. Typically only lawyers and law firms can collect legal fees. And so we went through this really long process to become certified by the State Bar of California. We were
oh my gosh,
totally regulated. It took a year to do that. We were audited every year, but we could never nail the like success piece of what made a successful engagement between lawyers and clients. Plus, lawyers never used our technology, our software systems to like update cases. And so we basically had either spent all this money to acquire these cases, sent them to lawyers, and they just went nowhere, or we had successful engagements, but then we didn't know what was going on with the case. The lawyer forgot about us and, basically became a collections agency on the back end of that. So it just wasn't a good business model. And I learned that like the hard way.
Yeah. We spent years grinding. So then what was this pivot, or what was this new whole company you started? Because you kind of decided, okay, this isn't working, shut it down. And then
well, I actually sold it. Sold it basically for parts, basically got out at par. I didn't make any money.
Yep.
And I didn't make any money for most of the years that I worked there,
Yep.
So I lost money, but on an equity basis, it was even, right?
Yeah.
And it became just an advertising company that like pooled lawyer dollars who wanted to hide behind like a proxy brand.
Got it.
But still receive the cases. And that's not, my heart wasn't in that. So I figured, okay, well, I know so much more than I did when I started, but I also know how much more I don't know. And I wasn't aware of that previously. So I decided, okay, I'm going to go to business school. I think this is a good time. And I need that because I've never had a formal business education. Remember, I had a degree in languages. So I started to study for the GMAT. And funny thing happened on the way to business school. I started to really notice like, hey, the test prep industry, especially in higher ed, is super, I don't want to say predatory. I'd say like the power dynamics are not in the favor of the consumer, because lifetime value basically is the equivalent of one sale per one application season. Nobody's coming back. Like nobody pays attention to turn attention, whatever, in test prep, because most people either take the test, they get in, or they take the test, and they didn't score well and they just don't go. Very few like come back for another season. So you don't care about that. So that also, what that means is that your product can be mediocre. It has to just be good enough to get the sale. It's all about sales. It's not about the product or your outcomes. So like that's at the disservice of the customer who's a student, right? In the case
you're talking about like GMAT prep here, for example.
Exactly. And so in the case of the GMAT student, right, like GMAT's a very difficult test. It's, your score is relative to the scores of other students around the world, right? So in the quantitative section especially, it's very difficult for Americans to score well because the way we learn math is like less rigorous from a K-12
Somehow I scored higher on verbal. It was like, I somehow did really well in math.
That's not uncommon. Yeah. Well,
No, you're also up against people who are going to business school who tend to be better in math. So math tends to be the harder one to score.
It does. So we decided to start there, thinking, and I got ahead of myself, but what ultimately happened is I teamed up with my GMAT tutors, who were just these two independent guys who had like focused just on the quant section and had actually developed their own extremely in-depth curriculum. It was like they originally wanted to publish it. And so it would have been the equivalent of about 4,000 pages, but it actually became a software platform that we developed together. So we all teamed up. I like led the charge because, I knew how to build software. Mm-hmm. And so then recruited a team. We decided to actually build the best product out there to help students succeed on the GMAT. We went into the GRE and that was really successful. I think it still is one of the top GMAT, GRE, test prep companies out there.
That's awesome.
Called Target Test Prep.
And that's just still focused on the math or is it?
Yeah, primarily.
Cool. That's awesome. So what happened there? Like at the end, you exited somehow, they bought you out. What happened?
So I realized, early on, right from the get-go that like,
wait, and this was through business school.
This is before business school.
Oh, before. Okay.
On my way.
On your way.
A kind of unexpected thing. So instead of like just studying with my tutors, I teamed up with them and spent 2 years with them, building this. So, but from the get-go, I was very clear that I'm not going to stick around for more than 2 years because I still want to go to business school. I didn't want to like age out of going to a full-time business school.
Right.
So I was getting to that point. I was like 29 or so at the time. So,
talk to listeners about that aging out of, do you feel like there's like a cutoff where if you don't go to business school, it gets much harder in terms of, they won't like say there's age discrimination, but there probably is, right? In terms of
well, I don't even know about that. I think definitely believe that's true between, you and me and everybody listening.
Yeah.
But I also think there's another factor, which is like your benefits diminish over time as you get more experienced. Plus, if you are like at HBS and you're 36 and the median guy or girl is 28, there's a big difference there. And so that can kind of be weird as well. Your other option is the executive MBA, and there's a whole other, host of things to consider. It's much more expensive and, it's just a different format. So for me, I wanted to go to full-time MBA. So I committed to 2 years. And at the end of that, throughout the whole time, I'm taking the GMAT, but I was also taking it for like my own edification to, lead better, like build a product.
Yeah.
And I was like really eating the dog food because I was also studying the GMAT. So I took the GMAT, like, I think I've taken the official GMAT like 6 times or something. You can only take it like 4 times a year, I think. So that shows you. Yeah. I've taken the GRE like 4 or 5 times. So I know this test really, really well now, but, so kind of towards the end of that, I was applying for business school and decided that I was kind of disenfranchised, which like with your typical like top business schools, HBS, Stanford, et al. Just thought for me, it was not I'm not the banker, I'm not the consultant. I was the entrepreneur, West Coast entrepreneur kind of guy. And I wanted to, be in tech. So they'll all tell you that, they have pathways for that. And I think these days it's gotten a lot better. But at the time I kind of went to class visits and thought, I don't really think I fit in here.
And so did you like go to Stanford or apply to Stanford? Because Stanford seems like it might have been a good match given your entrepreneurial background.
It would have. I just think, I did apply. I didn't get in there. But
it's like a 4% acceptance rate or something. But yeah.
Yeah, but I wasn't upset about it because I felt like it was just a smaller, a scaled down version of the general demographic of other top business schools. Yeah. I thought for a moment, I'm really just not going to go to business school. And so
what changed? What do you mean? You like?
So what changed was I found a program randomly called Cornell Tech, which is a campus actually of Cornell, but there's 7-degree programs there. And one of them is an MBA program. It was a very new experiment to have a cross-functional and integrated MBA experience across like technical functions as well as like business versus just being in a business school silo with just MBA students.
So you were kind of playing with the idea of going there, but then ended up at the full-time program, right?
Well, so that is a full-time program. So I did go there.
Okay. So you did the Cornell Tech. Yeah, that's right.
So I ultimately went there. I mean, at first I was skeptical. So I thought it was just marketing like everywhere else about, being open for tech. But the more I like peeled back the layers, I realized, wow, this is really substantive. Like, this guy who's the CTO, former CTO of Twitter, he is one of the practitioners who teaches a course. Like Eric Schmidt was the chairman of the board of governors. I think he's still on the board. The dean at the time was on the board of Amazon. And so like that trickled down. There were like real substantive, there was real substantive involvement from the tech industry, and the program specialized. So like your peers, none of my peers, maybe one or two of them were bankers in my business school program, but they all had
is that like, are there other places like that, or is Cornell unique in the sense of like having and so what does that even mean in terms of being in the Cornell Tech /MBA program? Like, are you doing like learning how to code as well on the side, or is it more just like a business degree with a tech bent to it?
It's sort of all of the above. So, I mean, you spend your time across two campuses. You're at the main campus, the main business school to do all your core. And then you move to the Cornell Tech campus in New York City, which is on Roosevelt Island. And I was part of the first class there. And it's a beautiful campus. Like, I think it's like a $2 billion campus they built on the southern tip of Roosevelt Island. The view from my apartment on campus was insane. I could see.
I've been there. Yeah. I lived in New York, and I played soccer on Roosevelt Island. I was like,
oh, awesome. Amazing. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a really cool place. And it's like one of the best hidden gems in the city. It's quiet at night there. The Duane Reade closes at like 7. It closes in general, but it closes at 7. It shows you how like sleepy it gets. But it's like, just like 10 minutes either on the tram or on the F from Manhattan. But what happens at Cornell Tech is that there's 7 degree programs across like 3 schools. There's business, there's law, but then there's like 3 or 4 engineering programs, and a third of the curriculum is integrated. So you do learn how to code if you don't know, but mainly the backgrounds they pull from are the tech people. And what happens is like you end up building a product cross-functionally, like where you're the only MBA, you have like 3 engineers. One is like a Master of Engineering student. The other might be like operations research or some other specialized master's program in CS. And just like the real world, right? Where you're not going to be just around other MBAs. You want to be a product manager, that's going to be your life. And like, there's a huge age difference, right? But like, for me, it was like 10 years from me to the rest of my teammates. And that was like pretty standard. But it mirrors the real world. And I think that's super valuable. So we built a data science tool for 2 Sigma Ventures one semester, and then everybody builds a startup, or used to make it so everybody built a startup. Now you have the choice, I believe. But so then you come together again in the fall and build.
And so, tell me, it sounds like you loved it.
It was a great program. It's very, very difficult because it's you take on all this extra stuff over like typical business school. And it's not the program where you're like flying around the world hanging out because you finished your core and like you're just part of it. It's not that. It's way intense. Like, there's a lot of 4 a.m. nights, and it was hard. It was really hard. And
so as you're kind of approaching that critical summer, like where a lot of people are doing, your classmates are doing internships, what were you doing? Just building?
Just building. And then, trying to figure out what came next. Because at that point, I was only aspirationally like wanting to get into VC, but going from business school to VC in earnest is very difficult, and I knew that.
Yeah. So like, what did you do? How did you start planning? It's like, how did you start planning it? What was the path here?
The first thing I did is I leveled with myself, kind of and that's to say, like, I knew that the odds were low. I knew that there was like a good, potentially like 50% chance or lower I wasn't going to make it if I was even like, and that's 100% committed to trying. So I knew that was possible. So I figured like, well, there's no path and there's no like recruiting cycle. There's none of that. And it's a very insular industry. So the only thing that I had going for me is that I had been an entrepreneur, but I hadn't like raised money from like big funds and had a huge network of VCs. It's not even close. Yeah. So I just figured like, well, I'm going to network the shit out of this, right? I'm going to go like meet every VC I can and try to help them in some way, because what I do have are founders in my Rolodex and have, companies that I'm aware of. And so I got involved with student VC groups. I initially thought, okay, well, that's really going to help. Got involved with RareBreed VC, which is run by MBA students at Cornell. I thought about doing like the dorm room fund type of stuff. Ultimately, in hindsight, those weren't valuable at all.
Okay.
I can't speak for any specific program that I wasn't in, but like, at least for me, I felt like, and now I know, this is really an apprenticeship business, and it's hard to mirror that without, being fully immersed.
Do you feel like just having that on your CV at least helped a little bit in terms of like the networking?
No, not at all.
Well, like the honesty?
No, not in the slightest. I mean, you think that when you're a student, you're like, oh, this is so cool because it's hard to get in, because there's a ton of demand from other MBA students and other, people, if it's open to other programs or other schools, which some are, like there's all of this demand. So it's really selective. So it's hard to get in. So you feel like, okay, well, I've made it and this is going to really help me. But looking back, no, it wouldn't have made any difference.
So really it was more about just the relationships you were developing just through networking?
Yes, I'd say this is where it gets to like non-generalizable advice, because this is very specific to my situation. But when, in the summer, we moved down to Cornell Tech in Roosevelt Island, and it was a huge event because this was something that had started with Mayor Bloomberg. He had like made this competition for that land on Roosevelt Island, and it ultimately went to Cornell after they beat out Stanford. And so I was the first class on that campus. So I was there for the inauguration of the campus, or dedication of it. The governor was there, the mayor was there, all these dignitaries were there. And so it was a big deal. And so New York City Tech was paying a lot of attention, but there wasn't really like a visitor bureau or like any institutional way for like folks who were in the industry and curious to like get involved, because it was still like getting stood up on its legs, and didn't have like just excess people in the administration to go just like be the ambassadors to the tech community. So I figured, okay, well, this is interesting. I've kind of got a sense that like New York VCs are curious about what's going on, because a lot of startups do come from there. There's also an amazing program called the Runway program, which is like one of the best kept secrets, but it's a postdoc program. It's a 2-year postdoctoral incubator for new PhDs, where these guys and girls are commercializing their research and building these like super defensible, really, really, really interesting companies.
That's cool.
So I figured I'm going to be the ambassador, unofficial ambassador. It's all of that.
Okay. So you kind of started what, in New York primarily, like going around and
started going around and
doing a lot of coffee chats and
did that, but then realized I need to do more. And so I wanted to up the value that I could offer them, and that's what you have to do in VC if you're looking to get in. It's like, you can't just be a guy asking for coffee chats and hoping to get a job out of that. You have to kind of like really just on blind faith, invest in a relationship and like either provide value in the form of bringing them deals. That's the best case, right?
You're sourcing deals for them, saying, oh, I know this company that's thinking of, raising blah, blah, blah.
That's right.
So was that how you eventually kind of broke it? You started bringing 1 or 2 great deals to somebody, or no?
Not quite. So what I ended up doing was, as that unofficial ambassador, I connected the entrepreneurs on Roosevelt Island with the VC crowd in New York, primarily seed and pre-seed investors who were really interested in what was going on, at this shiny thing in the river. I'm going so far as to like organize a happy hour in conjunction with like a fund in New York that was like held off campus that they paid for, like just to bring like, founders, folks who were starting companies and who already had companies while they're there, to like, just to get to know the team there. And so that was like kind of my niche, and that led to a couple interviews.
And so, like, what do you mean?
Expect it.
What do you mean it led to interviews? Like the partners started coming up to you and just saying, hey, you're looking for a job?
Well, then exactly, knowing that I was looking for a job, now you sort of have some like political capital, or you're at least like endeared.
Because you're seen as like the organizer, you're seen as the person that's bringing people together, which is like half the battle in VC is like sourcing, right? So
it is, but what happens in VC when there's a job opening, depending on the seniority, there's an experience catch-22. You want, people who've done the job before. And the only way to get the experience to do the job is to have done the job before. So if you're trying to break in, it's even harder. So I knew that like I would have to kind of get in that circle somehow and get some like secret, job openings that weren't public, that would be circulating around.
Yeah. The shadow job market is huge, right? So
it is. Yeah.
How did you start? Like, how much did you do before you started kind of hearing about these roles or these openings and landing what would be more considered like a formal interview? Like how many events did you put on with like these? Was it 10? Was it 2? Was it 20? Like, what was it?
There was like 2 big ones, but it was just more of like an ongoing thing. And then I think, subsequent to that, like, of course, like bringing them deals, whether they did them or not. I think if they're high quality, that says something about you. It says something about who you're connected to. And, in VC, you have to be connected to the founder ecosystem. So I think that also is like evidence of that. But basically just building goodwill enough that somebody would even like, give you a like warm intro to the partners at a fund who are hiring for a specific role. Like that goes a long, long way because like that's from a peer investor versus you're this MBA student.
And tell me about your experience of just like, or expectations, like coming from, you were grinding at a startup, you could have probably gone to investment banking or consulting, made 6 figures. What was your anticipation or experience kind of like going for these interviews? And like, what was it like, the actual more formal interview? Was it more just a conversation because you already had the relationship going and, or did you have some interviews that like, where they're like, okay, let's keep talking. And they just like slow played it.
All of those happened. There's no structure. Most of them are conversations.
Yeah.
These are people who are used to having conversations.
But there's no like technical interview. They're not like trying to like, they're not testing you on like cap tables and like.
No, I mean, your mileage may vary there, but I think not there.
Yeah.
But I ended up not taking any of those offers.
Okay. Why?
So this is not something I also expected to happen too, but I ended up taking an internship versus an actual job. And that's because I got the opportunity to have this like post MBA internship at Andreessen Horowitz. And I really wasn't excited about the fact that it was an internship. I was getting married in November of that year. I was like, of all the student debt, like I don't need to be paid $30 an hour to like maybe have a job in 3 months. That sounds like really the riskiest thing I could do. But once I went for the interview at the office in New York, back then it was just 3. I was ultimately the third of like 3 people who worked there. Now I think it's much, much bigger. But I kind of I had my first peek behind the curtain of like the whole like Sand Hill Road machine. And I was just blown away. This is at my first interview. I was like blown away. And I realized, okay, well, I have to do this. I'm going to learn so much more here and I will just fight to stay. I will just, grind, hustle, whatever it takes for, me to stay here after my internship. And so that's what I did.
So there's this internship program at like, is this common like at Andreessen versus?
It's not even a program. It's not even a program.
So what do you mean? So they were just like,
my boss is a Cornell alum and was hiring and from a couple schools, Cornell being one of them. So I actually had to beat out a couple of my classmates for it.
But he was just hiring as an intern and saying, I can't promise you a job after 3 months because they're just so scrappy. And it was like a new office in New York.
That's right.
Got it. And so you were like, just hire me. It's fine. I'm getting married. I have all this student debt, but I'm going to roll the dice because I know in this, at least with Andreessen, it's a well-oiled machine, or they're going to be bringing a lot of best practices from Sand Hill to the New York office. And you're going to probably learn more there versus like some startup fund or something.
Yeah, precisely. And mainly that like, I just felt like I was going to see the like rarest end of the market for VC, meaning that like the fewest people will get to see behind that curtain versus like most of VC are like smaller funds. I was at a place that had like a seat at the power dynamics and, had billions of AUM and, had, amazing companies in its portfolio and was really like a household name. Just felt like I was going to see so much more and learn so much more in that environment that I just couldn't.
You had to beat out all these other classmates and other MBAs for the lucky
internship.
Role of a $30 an hour internship.
Correct. So,
I love it.
Yes. So my now wife, fiance at the time, that was her experience or her reaction to. She was not thrilled.
Well, I feel like this is actually really important for the listeners to hear. Is like venture, like this is I feel like it's very common. It's almost like no, you're going to have to be here and you're going to have to prove it. And on top of it, you're not going to get paid much. Okay. So they bring you on. What's your role kind of coming in? What's your expectation of like what the internship's going to be? And then how did you think this is how I land the full-time job?
So the role was on a team called market development, which sits between the portfolio, mainly on the enterprise side, and then those portfolio companies, their intended customers. So mainly Fortune 100 companies, like big corporates who spend billions a year individually, sometimes like JP Morgan, on technology. And so that's the market they tap into. And it's really it was an interesting window into enterprise software, at least, because I got to be in these like thousands of these meetings where it's us and a couple of portfolio founders, and then like the CIO or CISO or CTO from JP Morgan or Goldman, or, you name it. And it's, you are sort of like a consultant in that regard as well.
Like you're helping the portcos get ready for those meetings. What else?
You're also helping the corporates. Like, first thing you do is, we would get like the full download, and they bare their soul to us about their initiatives, their problems. And this is all in terms of technology. And so then we get consultative and like figure out, well, which of our portfolio companies might actually solve these issues, and like, and looking forward, like actually might fit within your strategic roadmap for technology that like goes all the way to the top. So we start there.
If you'll spend $30 million a year on this, we can have these guys develop it and like they'll do that.
It's more so like they have, take banks. Banks are notoriously, a couple decades behind the trend in terms of their infrastructure. The classic examples, there's still mainframes in banks, and we're here in a cloud world. So even moving to cloud in a compliant, regulated industry as well, like, is a big issue. So there's a lot of security requirements and other sorts of issues that are material to a large publicly traded investment bank. So there's so many problems that are associated with that. These are mainly like gaps in where the market was, and our solutions in the form of portfolio companies were like the new ways to solve certain business problems like that from a technology perspective, or like higher level, just to like run processes more effectively in some cases.
What were there any assurances given to you this 3-month internship that there was a certain percentage given full-time offers or anything like that?
Zero. No, this wasn't even a program. It wasn't
even a program. It was just you?
It was just me.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so you're kind of hoping you can stay. You're doing this. This is right after you graduate. You just start working with them?
Not only that. So I made it clear I want to stay, but I also made it clear that I wanted to change. I wanted to be an investor as well. Right. So
you wanted to be on the investment team.
Correct. And I was on a team that was like adjacent to that, but we were not involved. We were involved post-investment on that team.
Yeah. So you weren't going in on the investment committee meetings and like arguing or like reviewing potential investments. And
no, that's where I wanted to be. And so, that was kind of a hard sell to my boss too. I mean, he was great about it, but like that, hey, thanks for having me. By the way, I'm going to hustle to stay, but I also want to leave your team and do something else.
Yeah. So tell me, so he was in the market development. He was the lead of the market development. So he's probably like, yeah, okay, whatever. So tell me how that played out.
So I just grinded, and I like, basically did everything I could to like add value and also like really help that whole organization run better, starting with that pod. And then, looking to, I had specific skills, I was really good at like putting together technology tools. I understood like the power of leveraging off the shelf SaaS tools to like, completely change how a internal process is done. And so I started to like, just be proactive and on my own, start doing things, and then suggesting them, to my boss once like I had enough evidence that like, hey, this is actually effective and impressive. So I ended up getting to stay. And then I moved back to the West Coast to go work out of the Menlo Park HQ, which is a totally different experience too, because like, at the time it was like 150 people versus 3. And that was super interesting as well. Cause like,
were you still in the market development team there?
Technically, yes, but I was doing some more stuff horizontally. Okay. I was like, my boss was in New York technically. So I was,
you were given a little more latitude to do some stuff.
I was hustling because I wanted to stay until, ultimately I realized one day I had an epiphany, like, well, if I'm going to stay, I would be on the enterprise team. I don't really, enterprise software and enterprise, like, networking, security, software-defined networking, stuff like that, microservices. Stuff is I understand it. It's interesting. It's important, but it's not what resonates with me enough that like day in, day out, that's all you're like living, sleeping, breathing.
So what did you do when you made that realization? So how long were you in Menlo before you kind of said, okay?
So I was there. It was like a good amount of time after I had arrived. I don't remember exactly. It was a little less than a year, but I ended up leaving, and then I like wanted to continue with my original mission to, be a venture investor. And I had brought in a lot of founders at that point. I had gotten more in the world when I was at A16Z on the investment side than I had been when I was in New York. So I felt like that was good. And that actually gave me enough insight to realize like, this is not what I want to do in this vertical. So I want to go to a generalist fund. And so that's how I ended up at Sparrow Ventures, which is kind of the opposite. It's like $125 million Series A fund. That's a single LP fund backed by Piero Midyar, who's the founder of eBay. And was like 3 years old at the time, or even less. It might have been 2, but it was the total opposite of that.
And so what was it like in the sense of, you're now a generalist, you're looking at everything, networking with everyone?
That's right. So I'm a super, super generalist because I'm the guy with a degree in languages who's like sort of an autodidact on the technology side and like taught himself how to code. And so I'm really a good generalist. And so I felt like that would be
is a good fit. Is a good fit for you then. I
felt like that'd be a good fit. And so it was interesting too, because that's at a fund of that size versus this like, relative behemoth like Andreessen. At Sparrow, I got to see like broadly horizontally how a fund runs, how it works. Not much fundraising because we had a sole LP, right? But just on the operational perspective in the day to day, and so that was really interesting. Yeah, and I had a lot of say, and I had a lot of my voice mattered a lot because I was one of like 3 or 4 on the investment team, even though our overall team was 6 or 7.
Right. It's interesting. So you were there.
I was there 2 years
during the pandemic.
Yes, I was there during the pandemic. So I left last July.
Okay. And tell me about this. Yeah, tell me how this happened. And would you say this is typical where it's like, eventually you go become, you work for a few years and then you become a partner somewhere?
It's not typical. Mm-hmm. I would, but I was also pretty experienced at that point. I had built software for basically 10 years. And then I had a couple of years of VC under my belt, and I had been, very interested in venture capital for a long time. So I was not new, even the first time, I technically was a VC. It wasn't anything new or foreign. Yeah. So it's not typical because what most people do is you either enter really young, right out of undergrad, and you become an analyst somewhere, and you stay for a year or 2, and you either like get hired as an associate or senior associate somewhere else, or you go to business school or something like that, or you go to a portfolio company. The other route is less standard, but you kind of just get in randomly. I noticed a lot of people had ended up at Andreessen Horowitz randomly by virtue of working at portfolio companies that had succeeded or failed, or just by getting to know a general partner somehow in some capacity and working together, or by being on a board, even a board observer, from another fund that had a shared, or had a co-investment with, A16Z. There's a lot of cross-pollination on boards as well. But, the other path is you go get your MBA and you go try to get in post-MBA as like a post-MBA senior associate somewhere. And I think that's like one of the hardest paths because there's not a lot of those opportunities.
Not a lot of seats. Yeah. It's like private equity, like not a lot of seats. Yeah.
That's right. And you have to have some X factor too, because if you're a guy who's just like worked at Deloitte, or you're, even if you were in traditional finance, like you basically know nothing about VC. There's nothing aligned versus if you had worked in a startup, your own, or even just your blue chip kind of startup as an employee, like that's still more relevant.
How did you even land the Sparrow role? Like how did it even come up? Another shadow? Like they weren't really hiring, but you just like created a role for yourself? I
just applied.
Applied. Okay. So it's a traditional thing. And then
I just applied, and it was that was a very long process because And at that point, I had interviewed a lot of funds and had similar processes where it's like, you know, your basic phone screen to getting to know you to, okay, here's a project. And that's the key. That's the key part of the story in almost all of these interviews for the more junior roles. Like there's going to be some sort of project that's going to, you know, the goal of which is to see how you think and would think about, you know, things broadly. So
can you give an example of like a project?
Yeah. So I did this, you know, when I was thinking of the enterprise world, I went back on my original thinking, well, I need to get a job. So like maybe since I was working on enterprise team at A16Z, maybe I should just try another enterprise fund. And so I did some interviews there, and I'm glad it all didn't work out. But like I had to do this project there that was basically this like whole overview of this like technology called service mesh, which was still pretty nascent and like super technical and very far away from like the end user in farm technology. We're talking about like, this is like in the DevOps sort of world. And it's not something that's like really Googleable, or at the time it wasn't, in the sense that like, it was so new that I had to like truly find my own like unique perspective on it. And it was really technical. And I spent a lot of time on that. And I did a pretty okay job, but I realized, you know, too, like, this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
again. So I like, okay, kind of woke up again from that dream. And then at Sparrow, I had some project, but it was more about analyzing a company, but of my choosing in a specific space. Like they had these 3 core themes that they invest in, even the generalist, like health and human connection. Oh my God, I'm forgetting already. Sorry, climate sustainability, and there's one other, but you know, pick a company in any of those and give a whole like presentation on why you would invest, and then, you know, just basically analyze the opportunity and present your thinking. So I did that, and I figured, you know, with all of these.
How did you choose on a startup from that? How would people think about screening for that?
Well, I think you could do the obvious thing, right? Which is pick the obvious company that was going to succeed or that had succeeded already, and you're just going to like triple down on its success. I wanted to actually pick a company that I would pass on. So I picked a company that I knew would be a no, but it would be a nuanced no. Like it wouldn't be a clear no either. That's the opposite of that, which is like, okay, yeah, well, if the company is, you know, losing, you know, $10 million a month and they've got, you know, 300K in the bank, like anybody could pass on that company.
Yeah.
Or the CEO is like, just got convicted of a felony. You know, those are easy passes. I wanted like a very nuanced pass and to give a thoughtful reason as to why.
Yeah.
And so that's what I did. I found, I don't remember the company, but it was some app that was, you know, I really don't even remember, to be honest. I could dig it out somewhere. I still have the presentation, but like more important was the research that went into it and the whole like market perspective that framed it. And then, you know, what I would want to see. And here's where I leveraged my product background from building products for so long, which is like really talking about product metrics and understanding, if you don't even know this stuff right now, at least conveying what would you want to know if you were looking at this deal for real? Because I wasn't looking at a real deal. So I had like less information than VCs would about a company.
Yeah. Very cool. That's awesome, man. So how are things kind of now that you're a partner and you're kind of...
Yeah. So what happened after that was started to team up with a friend of mine, and we partnered up to raise a little pre-seed and seed fund, but it was too small to support 2 people because of the management fee structure. It could only support 1. And so I had a job at the time, and thankfully we were doing exclusively Series A investing, and this is a pre-seed and seed fund. So I cleared with my boss because I didn't want to have any conflict or do it in secret. It arguably made a lot of sense because there's this, you know, you're talking to all these like seed stage companies that are going to be raising an A one day, and so you're already like in that mix.
Yeah, find the best ones and then feed them to us. Yeah, no, I get it.
That's right. So
what was the size of the fund? Like $1 million, couple $1 million? What was it?
It was $10 million.
Okay, so you had something to start with, and the checks were what? Like,
well, this is a fund 1, and so it was a very long process to raise that fund. So it took a year. Took a year to close on the full amount. And at the time, my partner, his name's Matt Conwell. He became like a pretty famous or well-known Twitter VC. It's one of the most visible guys out there. And that sort of happened in conjunction with this. So, you know, I left in last July, and at that point we had almost raised the whole fund. What's happened since then is we've of course closed on the whole fund, but we've invested in nearly 30 companies. And on paper, we've done really well, at least on paper. You know, I can't take full credit for that. The market has been like insane. And so it's kind of hard not to do well, but you know, we think, you know, hopefully that like we're doing a little bit better than, you know, there's some alpha in there basically.
Yeah.
And LPs seem to think that too. So we're raising a much bigger fund to, you know, somewhere in the 75 to 125 region.
It's a big deal.
It is. So hopefully, you know, so we're just getting started on that now, but I will be general partner. Mac and I will be the two GPs of that fund. And that's where we are, I guess, today.
Super exciting. So now it's a lot of, since the first 10 million has been deployed, there's a lot of your time spent on, you know, just portfolio company work, sort of helping them, or are you kind of still looking for new deals and there's a way you can kind of tap and there's some initial commitments?
So definitely both. We're not fully invested. You know, we have still like quarterly capital calls. So we still have capital coming in. So we have, and then we have reserves. So we've invested most of it, but not all of it. So we definitely are speaking with founders. Most of my day is talking to founders, either, you know, new founders, or, you know, helping portfolio, which is always on our mind. I for a couple months, I also dropped into one of our portfolio companies to help out from July up until just the other month with some specific issues around BD and helping them. They were, you know, crazy story, but they like went from 0 to about 300,000 users in 8 weeks. And so, you know, I was then like drawing on my previous startup experience because I have gotten comfortable with that kind of craziness. You know, I kind of feed on it. Yeah. It was really nice to sort of be back in that for a little bit. So I dropped in to help. Now, like that company is doing great and they don't need me anymore. So, but that perfectly coincided with like our fundraise, or kicking off our fundraise. So yeah, basically sourcing and portfolio, and now LP type of networking and just kind of making our way around the fundraising circuit for those who invest in VC funds.
It's great. And so do you feel like, you know, looking back at all of your kind of moves and all of your whole story from college now, do you get any kind of words of wisdom if you were talking to yourself when you were younger, or to the listeners out there who maybe partway through your similar path? Oh yeah, a lot. I mean, it's hard on one hand because I like, you know, firmly believe that here you are where you are, you know, by virtue of where you've been. And I think like that's hard to argue with. So I don't know if I'd change anything because I don't know how that would change what I'm doing now. And I'm happy where I am now, but I would have definitely been more thoughtful about what I wanted to do in college and kind of looked ahead more. I was kind of like, I kind of had the sense like I didn't really care. I just was a little too overly optimistic that things would work out. And so I'd been more thoughtful about, you know, choosing a major, right? I could have studied a couple languages. I could have also done, you know, computer science or something as well. I didn't need like 3 languages, but I just tripled down. But also I learned a ton about the value of being able to teach yourself things really, really quickly. But I don't think I would again, personally, start a company right out of college. That really was hard because I didn't know much. It was a great learning experience, but it's learning experience that comes from getting punched in the face every day. And for 6 years. For 6 years. But there comes a point where you kind of can look back and go, wow, I've learned a ton. But then I got there and saw the other end of that mountain range and I was like, oh my God, I know nothing. Because you're seeing the gulf the other side. You know enough to know how little you know. Yeah. But at the same time, like I could have gotten, you know, valuable operating experience at another startup, and I wouldn't have been so like poor and destitute in those years, which is important because that's like a foundation for, you know, as you continue rising in your 20s. And as a guy who only did startups at the top business school, you know, I had definitely made less money than my peers because I was so devoted to this company. And I feel like had I gone work somewhere, especially at like a name brand startup, I would have had good experience. I would have had more money, and I could have brought both back to, you know, be even a more effective founder later on. But I wasn't thinking like that. Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I look at, you know, I've been running Wall Street for 15 years or 16 years and over a decade full time. And there's so many times I look back and I'm like, oh my gosh, why didn't I do that earlier? Or, oh, what a big mistake. Just, obvious things, you don't know what you don't know. Right. So,
that's right.
Yeah. And that's always the danger is you're going to turn around, you're going to wake up one day and realize what you left on the table.
Yeah. No, truly.
That's my, that's my thing. I think I need to have more conversations with like mentors. Maybe you could be a mentor for me.
That's a good trade. I'm actively accepting new mentors in my life as well.
So,
I'm light in the mentor department.
But no, I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your story. I think there's a lot of good lessons here if people kind of peel it back. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom.
Thank you. No, thanks for having me, Patrick. This is great. And look, it was great chat, and you did awesome. Thanks for the interview.
And thanks to you, my listeners at Wall Street Oasis. If you have any suggestions whatsoever, please don't hesitate to send them my way, Patrick@wallstreetoasis.com. Until next time.